Hello. It is good to see you again. In case you forgot, my name is AJ. Wave your hands in the air if you remembered my name. I see you. You are my favorite. Today I have some questions about social media. I want you to shout out which one you think deserves first place. If you could only use one social media platform for the rest of your life, would it be Snapchat or TikTok? You understood the assignment. Which influencer is number one in your book? Please tell me their name. I can't hear you. I don't know about that. In your free time, do you put scrolling through your feed in first place or hanging out with friends? If it's scrolling through your feed, stand up. You should get out more. I guess we don't always agree on what should be in first place. Or maybe we can.
Hey everyone, my name is Nathan and I'm part of our high school ministry team here at Eastside. And I'm so glad you're here as we're diving into this week of our series called First Place. It's all about the stuff that's most important in your faith, and it's the one thing that Jesus can use to change everything. And as we get started, let me ask you a question. Have you ever wondered how some things work? Like the things that are really complicated or confusing to figure out? Take FaceTime, for example. How in the world does it take my voice and face and show it to someone else? How does the video and sound travel across a location or even sometimes across the world? Oh, and it does it all at the exact moment that I need to, which is even more amazing. Unless you're an Android user and you're still writing letters. I'm joking, but I'm not really sure how FaceTime works, but I'm grateful that I get to use it all the time. I mean, I'm starting to think it's probably an invention from a fictional, technological super civilization like Wakanda or some Marvel multiverse that I can't comprehend. But what about virtual reality? How can you put on a pair of goggles and feel like you're in a different world? The sights, the sounds, even the way your stomach turns, it all makes it seem like you're somewhere else when you're literally still standing in your bedroom. How can that even happen?
Oh, he did?
A while back, my friend Grant let me try playing golf on his VR headset, and after 10 minutes of that, I felt sick to my stomach, so I'm gonna say the metaverse is not for me. And I don't know about you, but I've often wondered how things just simply work. When I just can't make sense of something, like FaceTime or a VR headset, I get really, really curious. And when that curiosity can't be satisfied, then I get frustrated. Like one time, I was trying to fix a problem with my very first electric guitar. After having it for a few years, I could tell some things had come loose inside, and I had some issues with the sound cutting in and out here and there. So I decided that with all of my 13-year-old expertise that I should take apart all the electronics in this main section of the guitar to clean them and see what was happening. No problem, right? Well, it turns out I wasn't as skilled as a guitar technician as I thought. This may surprise you, but not only did I not fix the problem, I actually ended up making it a lot worse. And you know, the more I think about it, the more I realize that sometimes I feel this way about God, and maybe you do too. Maybe you've wondered how all this faith stuff actually works, or maybe even tried fixing hard things on your own only to be left frustrated. Maybe you've wondered if God is even out there at all. And if God is out there, maybe you've been frustrated because you can't seem to understand what God is doing or even why he's doing it. Trust me when I say you are not alone. I think we all feel this way from time to time for a lot of different reasons. For starters, we can't actually see God, and that makes believing or understanding how he works a lot harder. And even if we do believe in God, we don't always feel God's presence in our lives, and that can make us question a lot of things too. Sometimes when we go through difficult circumstances, it doesn't feel that God is there for us. Or even when we see the way that other Christians act sometimes, it makes us think there's no way that God could be who we think he is if that's the way they behave. Maybe you've thought of one or even all of these things at the same point in your life. I know that I personally have many times. And there's some of you right now wondering if this God stuff is even worth your attention. We have a hard time as people trusting or believing because we can't see or understand how God works. And deep down, we question if any of this faith stuff can actually be real. Others of you may be here believing in God. You show up at JHM on the weekend, you pray at home, you do all the other things you're supposed to do that you think Christians are supposed to do, but if we're being honest together, You've been thinking about questions like the ones we're talking about today for quite some time. And we might act like we're very good on our own faith, but deep down, we carry all sorts of doubts and questions. I'll be the first one to say that's true for me. And honestly, all of that is okay. Doubts and questions can actually be a great thing for your faith. They have the potential to motivate you to really start looking for answers and learning more about God. Being curious about God and how faith works is a really good thing. It's the thing that can help us lean in to really fully understand who God is, how He works, and that ultimately it can grow our faith. So if you're here with questions or doubts about God, I am so glad that you are a part of JHM. Because what we're going to discover today will help us really get in to know more about God, who is always there, always working, and always wants us to know more. Of course, we're not the first people in the world to ask questions or wonder how God really works. People have been doing that for literally thousands of years. And in fact, a guy named Philip asked Jesus a very similar question about God nearly 2,000 years ago. That's a long time. But what's interesting is that Philip was one of the closest friends that Jesus actually had on this earth. Philip walked with Jesus, talked with him, paid attention to everything that he did, and Philip started to understand there was something special about Jesus after spending some time with him. To Philip, it seemed like Jesus had this really unique understanding of who God is and how God works. And because of that, I think Philip decided to take his questions about God directly to Jesus himself. And one day, Philip asked if he could go see God and experience God the way Jesus did. And well, he probably wasn't expecting Jesus' response. So let's take a look at what he had to say. Jesus said, "Don't you know me, Philip, even after I have been among you such a long time?" I don't know about you, but if I were Philip, I'd be a little confused by Jesus' response. Of course, Philip knew Jesus. He spent a ton of time talking with him and learning from him, but what did knowing Jesus have to do with knowing what God was like? How was his friendship with Jesus supposed to help Philip understand anything about God? Well, let's look at the next part of what Jesus said to his friend. Jesus said, "Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father." Jesus responded in this way because he wanted Philip to understand that knowing Jesus is the same as knowing God. Basically, Jesus was saying, Philip, if you want to know what God is like, just look at me. Jesus used this one thing to change everything about the way that we understand who God is. In that one moment, Jesus was not only claiming to actually be God, but he was telling Philip that everything he did and said was exactly what God would do and say. And in other words, Jesus shows us who God is and how God works because he is God. Think about what this moment would have been like for Philip. He'd been following Jesus and had experienced some incredible moments along the way. He saw Jesus heal a blind man. He saw Jesus show forgiveness and patience to a woman in the middle of a pretty bad situation. He saw Jesus raise a dead guy named Lazarus back to life. He even saw Jesus kneel down to wash his feet the way a servant would have done back in that time. Philip had the unique opportunity to get to really know Jesus. He watched the way Jesus cared for, loved, and healed all sorts of people from all walks of life. As he got to know Jesus over time, Philip learned to love and to trust Jesus. Before their conversation, Philip might have had a hard time understanding God because he couldn't see or feel God. But after Jesus' response to Philip, he understood that there was a way to know so much more about who God is and how God works, and that's just by getting to know Jesus. Jesus is God. How he lived is how God would live. What Jesus said is what God would say. And if Philip wanted to know what God was really like, all he had to do was look to Jesus. And this is the big piece of the puzzle that I don't want anyone to miss. Jesus is how you get to know God. I'll say it again. Jesus is how you get to know God. Why is knowing God so important, you might ask? Well, one of Jesus' closest friends, Matthew, recorded a conversation that Jesus had with some really important people that gives us a really good idea. So let's take a look at that. Jesus said, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on to these two commandments." I love this verse, so much so that I have a tattoo representing what Jesus is saying here. So you could say it means a lot to me. But here, Jesus is saying that life is about loving God, loving people, and loving ourselves. That's what's most important. That is what's in first place for us. One way that we can love God is by getting to know God and learning more about his heart, his actions, his character, and his work. And Jesus shows us everything we need to know about who God really is. Jesus is the answer to all of our questions about God. We get a chance to understand the way God works and what God cares about most when we get to know Jesus. We don't have to wonder how God works or if we'll ever figure God out.
Thank God.
Instead, we can look at Jesus to see who God is and what God is like, because Jesus is how you get to know God. If we're going to get to know God by getting to know Jesus, then I think it's really important for us to make getting to know Jesus first place in our lives right now. We can start today by doing these things. First, we can learning more about Jesus, what he did, what he said, and how he lived by reading real accounts in the Bible called the Gospels. The Gospels were documented by real people who actually watched how Jesus lived, listened to Jesus' words, and as you read the Gospels, pay attention to what you learn, what questions you have, and what that shows you about who God is. The second thing we can do is just to listen. Think of someone you know who loves Jesus. Maybe it's a small group leader, or an adult you live with, or a friend, and ask them to tell you more of their story and what they've learned about Jesus and who he is to them. As you listen to them share, remember that we can learn about Jesus from other people and how they've experienced him in their lives too. Now, maybe you don't fully believe all this God stuff yet, or maybe you're not sure if Jesus was telling the truth to Philip. And if that's you, I completely understand. I've had similar doubts and questions along the way too, some even to this day. That's why I want to encourage you to learn and listen this week. Make that a first place priority before you make a decision about your faith. My hope for all of us is that we get to know Jesus more through learning about him and listening to others' stories. We'll get to know God in a way that will truly change our lives and our faith. No matter where you find yourself today, I want you to remember this. Jesus is how you get to know God. Listen, we're always going to have questions about what God is like on this side of heaven, but I promise you, you will be able to trust in who God is by getting to know Jesus. Today, I'd love to encourage you to be bold and to be honest by sharing some of what you're wondering about God or discovering about Jesus with your small group. We've created small groups to be a space where you can learn and grow together openly and honestly. So maybe the best place to begin getting to know Jesus and in turn getting to know God is by talking about it with your small group today. I hope you will, and I know your group would love to hear what you have to say.